Hello and welcome. This is going to be a very rough video. It's going to be basically about some quick editing, color grading, and some tips for how to handle your primarily GoPro material from a quad. The reason I'm doing this is to see if there's going to be enough interest in me doing these in a more professional setting, with cameras and everything and, script. But this is just going to be a run of the mill. I'm just going to talk and do some stuff. So what I'm going to show you here mainly requires the use of DaVinci Resolve, and you can get that as a free version or as a studio version. The big difference between the two is basically that once you're in color grading mode, you don't get access to this part here, which is the noise reduction. Then there's the Fusion page, which is this one where you can do a lot of advanced stuff, and you won't be able to use that in the free version. The second very important thing is that the free version only uses your CPU instead of your GPU, and the GPU is quite important for doing heavy stuff. So let's get started. I have a clip up here. I'm not going to show you how to open DaVinci and all these things. I'm just going to show you a little bit, so to get those of you that don't know about it interested in the possibility of what you can do with your clips. And for those of you that do know, you can watch it if you want, but you don't need to. So here we have my clips. Now what I've done is I've dragged a clip over here, and the reason I want to show this first is because this is quite important. So if you take your clip in your browser or in your Explorer and you go for, this is in Danish, but you go for settings, details, here you can see what is the resolution of the clip and what is the frame rate of the clip. And this is very important info to us, not actually the resolution, but the frame rate. So this is 60, but actually it's not 60, it's 59.94. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have my clip up here. I'm then going to highlight somewhere else, right click timeline, create new timeline, and then in here we're going to remove this checkbox, go to format, and then we're going to select the timeline resolution. This is going to be a container where the clip is residing in, so it needs to be the right resolution. Now I always pick this one, which is 4K, even if I shoot in 2.7K, because it upscales it. Whether this has real benefits or not, it's hard to say, but I do feel that my videos are a tad more crisp than they would be if I put them out in, let's say, a 2.7K video in a 2.7K timeline. So we're going to pick 4K for this one. The timeline frame rate has to match. If it doesn't match, that's where you get the stuttery feeling. So there's a caveat to this. Let's say you're filming in pure 60, you could also go for a 30 FPS timeline. That would also work. But if you go for a 25 with a 60 FPS clip, that's not going to work. But for this, we're just going to pick this one. So now we have the two most important settings. Everything else you can leave for now and just click create. So now we have a timeline up here, and we're going to grab this clip here and drag it onto the timeline by doing so. And from here, it's pretty simple. That's me looking into the camera, as always. The top section here, video, is video, and the bottom green section is audio. We're just going to mute the audio because that's going to be horrible. Now, this whole clip here, as you can see right now, plays back very smoothly. That's because I did something to it. I have a pretty powerful computer with a 5950X CPU and an RTX 3080 Ti, but even without, with me just pulling in the raw clip, actually let me demonstrate it. I'm just going to pull in some clip over here. This clip hasn't been processed. Notice how stuttery it is when I scroll through it. That's because this has been filmed in H.264 by GoPro 9. And that format is actually, it has to be decoded in real time by the machine. So if I go back and forth over the same piece here, you can see that it's stuttering. So what you do is you right click on it and you choose this. What this does is it's going to crunch the numbers for a while. Let's just see it working for a bit. And once it's done crunching, you can actually scroll through the whole thing like this. So it makes like a local cache where it expands the H.264 container and makes you able to work with it. And this is very important. So for this clip, we're just going to pick a scene and then try to color grade it. Let's pick something. Let's see if we have something nice here. Yeah, we're just going to go with the start scene here, this. So we're going to cut off this bit here. We're going to select an endpoint. Let's just take these guys as well. So now we've cut off the ends. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I'm just going to show you my process of doing this in general. So the very first thing I always do is I check for the speed of it, because if we play back this clip in real time, you can sort of see the way I'm flying it. And this was a live event, so it wasn't planned. I didn't know what people were going to do, so not everything was perfect. Let's have a look here. So far this is pretty good, but it's still 20 seconds, which is very, very long. So let's say I want to make this for like an Instagram clip or just a short clip. What I want to do is I want to highlight the clip down here and press Ctrl R to enable this. You can also right click it and choose retime controls up here. So this gives me 100% down at the bottom. If I click this little arrow here and I choose 50%, everything is going to be playing back at a half speed. So this is very important to actually understand. When you're playing something in slow-mo, you can never go you can never go under 24 FPS, because if you go below that, that is what your eyes are going to consider being stuttery. So let's say I take this clip right now and I go to 25%. That means that it's going to be 60 FPS divided by 4. So if you take a look at it now, you can see that it's stuttering. If I go 50%, this means that this clip plays back at almost 30 FPS, which is fine, because that's half of the timeline, which is good. And it's also well above the 24 FPS we need. So this is very important when you're planning out your shots. If you want to fly somewhere where you want to slow things down, you cannot do that very much if you're filming in 30 FPS, because half that would be 15 FPS. So you would only be able to slow the clip down by 6% or something like that. But anyway, what I will do here is I'm going to go back to 100% and I'm going to look at the clip. So we're going to go like this. Well, if this was the intro, this would be a rough start, I think. So I would probably already start it off by saying 50%. So we're going to get into the action, and then right here you can see the guy looking into the camera. Now there are two ways of fixing this, because it's always annoying when people look at the camera. So one way of doing it would be going to just before he looks into the camera, like here, then add a speed point. And then we could do like an effect where we choose 400%. So we actually jump past him and then we go down to 50% again. So if we watch that now, it's going to look like this. But as you can see, the stop and start is a bit abrupt. It's a bit harsh. So in order to combat that, what we do is we right click on the clip itself and choose retime curve. By doing that, we get 2 points, one here and one here, which is for the in and out points. And you can actually move these as well for where you want this to start. So when you click this point, you can see over here, it has a linear progression. This means that it goes from 50% here up to 400 here. That's why it's such a rapid change. If we instead highlight the node and click this one, you get these small handlebars. So you can actually drag these handlebars. And what they mean is that we are going from 50% speed here, but the second you hit this little handlebar down here, it begins scaling from 50% up to 400%, which it will hit on the big node in the middle. And then it will actually ease out on the other side. So now this clip looks like this. It's a little bit more smooth, as you can see. So let's do that on both the entry and the exit. So now it's a little bit more tolerable. So let's put in the next one here. So we're just going to do a small clip actually. Let's just keep it there because there's no need to make this longer than it should be. So that's the first portion of it. The next portion I would probably do is begin color grading it. So to do that, I go into the color grading option. In here you have a wealth of options. So to get a quick overview of everything, this portion over here is your nodes. So this little window here contains a node containing the information about the window. That means that if I go down here, this is where I can alter stuff in the picture. So this one right here are the primaries, the color wheels. If I grab one of these and I just yank it, you can see that I'm turning the colors. And as I'm turning these colors and I let go, this node up here now contains that color. And that's pretty important because, because of several reasons. So right now we have this node here. Let's say that I thought this looked fantastic and I want to save all the changes I've done. I can go up here to gallery and then I can right click on the image and grab a still. Now you see up here we have a still that looks like the color we have in the picture. That's because it saved all the information I've done. So if we reset the original clip back to normal, You can see that my node over here is containing nothing. It's just how the clip looks. But over here I've saved a still image, which I can mouse over, and I can get everything that this still contains, all the settings I've changed, applied to the clip immediately. I can also right click it and apply it, and now we have those settings over here. So that's a very important way of doing things, because you can have more nodes. Let's add a node here. So now this one is our original node. Let's write that down. This is before we alter anything, and I always keep the original node as an untouched node. Then the secondary node we put after is where I do my color grading. Now, before I do anything, I'll look down here at the scopes. The scopes are showing what is burning outside the frame of reference. So if we look over here, you have 4 wheels. Now you can alter the settings on the wheels by grabbing these things here, or you can grab this one down here and change everything at once. So what you have is you have gain, which is typically boosting all the signals. And if you notice over in the scopes window, when I'm pulling it, it goes up. You can also see that it goes past the top line. And the second it goes past the top line, everything actually begins to wash out. So you're losing information at that point. Then we have the gamma. Gamma is a way of adding more light, or actually decreasing kind of the midtones of the image. So the same applies here. Let's say I pull it down. You can see at the bottom here that it's not actually going below 0, but it's getting squished. So it's really compressing until you can't see anything else. And then lift is where you lift everything you've done. So, and the offset we're going to wait with. So what I normally do, a very rough version of it, is that I pull up the gain to where I think the image is at its peak. And then when I'm there, I actually scroll through the video and see if this top changes, because sometimes you have a place where it's way lighter. So in this portion here, we're pretty safe. This is the tallest point and we're not exceeding. The next thing I do is I grab the gamma and I pull it down. Now I know that I'm going to be squishing this a little bit, but I want it to be squished a little bit because that gives it a more filmic look, I feel. Once I've done that, I can take the lift and I would typically pull this down just a little bit as well. So now we have this image right here that is slightly color graded, and it belongs to this node. So let's see, let's call this color grade 1. So when I'm highlighting this node and it's red, I can control D, or I can right click and actually, actually I don't know if you can right click it, but you can press control D and bypass it, like so. So now that it's black, it's not being affected, it's not working. So you can see already now the difference we've made. It's not a big difference, but it's a difference. Now we've made this very small color grade. I'm gonna add a new node, add a serial node, which is just a node in progression. Normally I would do more on this one, but now we're just gonna divide things out so you can have a look at it. Now we're gonna do contrast and others. So on this node here, I'm gonna be pulling on the contrast. It's a little bit more contrast, not too much, just a little bit. Like so. And then I would add another node, and this node would be, let's say, highlights and shadow. Well, there we go. So the highlights and shadow is pretty interesting, especially for GoPro users, because as you can see here, the sky is so white that it's almost lost all its texture. So if you take this highlight down here and you bring it down, you can sort of see the image creating itself again, where if you pull it up, it gets washed out. So the intention of the highlights is, and you have to be careful with this, because if you pull it down too much, the whole image gets kind of dull and boring, which can also be an effect. But for this obvious reason here, I just want to pull it down a little bit and create a little bit more of the texture in here. And again, this is very, very basic. As for the shadows portion of it, we don't need that much in it, but the one next to the highlights down here is shadows. So when I lift this, you can see on the scopes in the bottom right that we're lifting everything. We're squishing towards the top, but we're lifting all the bottom stuff. So what you would use this for is, let's say you have a dark room, or let's say over here by the trees. Now this is of course a GoPro 9 image, so you don't have that much detail, but let's say I lift the shadows a little bit, you would typically feel that you see a little bit more of the image. That's a bad example though. Let's go back here. Okay, look at this area right here. So the more we lift the shadows, the more it sticks out, and the more you lift the shadows, you could argue that you want to bring down the highlights, but you actually wouldn't. You would want to max out your highlights, and then this is where it's handy to have these divided up. You would go back again to the original color grade, which is actually labeled completely wrong, basic correction, because it's not color grading yet. And in this one, you would go back to this one because we have the gain, which is the one we lift the image with. So the gain right now is probably a little too high. Let's bring it down just a little tad here. So we have some playroom up here. So now we have a very, very basic edit of the whole thing. This is sort of a base point. Now, the next thing we would do, let's add a new one. And there are a million ways of doing this. So those of you that do it differently, I mean, that's fine, but this is just a way of explaining what it can do for you. In this one, we want to set our white balance, but if you notice how this goes, it has a green arrow here that goes all the way through, down here and down here. So setting the white balance right here might be a bad idea because it's applying a white balance to something that has already been changed. The way you can fix that is by not putting a node there, instead going back to the original node, right-clicking and choosing Add Node, Add Serial Before. Now this node here comes in before that. So we're gonna need this one white balance. So in order to set the white balance, we go to the left bottom corner and we pick this dropper. That's one way of doing it at least. And then we find something in the image that we know is white or that we know is gray. And often gray actually works better. But in this case, we're gonna pick this star. So once I click it, notice how everything changed. So I'm gonna take this node right now and disable it again, so you can see the difference. This is just standard from the GoPro 9, probably shot at a native ISO, but once we pick the right white balance, it actually looks more correct. And now we have to go on to the actual color grading of everything. So we've done a lot of basic correction, and again, there are many ways of doing this, but the way I would do it right now is I would add a final node here, you could say, and we would call this CG1, color grade 1. So in the color grading, there are different ways of doing this. One of the more basic ways of doing it is that you have this offset wheel. Now, when you pull this wheel, you kind of do the same as the white balance does, meaning that you change the tonality of the colors of the whole image. And you can do some fairly quick stuff with this. But in order to make all of this work best, you have to fiddle a bit more around with it. So for that reason, the offset is moving all of these together, and we don't want to do that. So first we go to the gain, and let's say we want this to be more filmic, so a bit more bluish in color. You would drag this over here slightly, maybe just like this. And then I avoid the gamma for right now because that's gonna pull the midtones, and I think those are fine. And we're gonna go for the lift and actually add a little bit over here as well. It's not a lot, just a little. But notice the difference this makes in the image. It looks a bit cooler and much more filmic. If I'm disabling it right now, as you can see. Let's do a full screen so you can actually see that. So one of the last things that you could do at this point is, well, you can do a lot, but one more thing you might want to do, and this is where the studio version comes in handy, is that you want to add some denoise. If you look at this, you can actually see that there's quite a lot of noise around here. We're not going to do that now because that's an advanced function, and those of you that have the studio version of DaVinci already know it. What we're going to do instead is we're going to add some effects. So now we're going to add a new node over here. And this new node, I know that some of you commented that you liked the tilt shift setting I was using, and this is probably also a paid thing, but I just want to show you what it can do for your material. So what I'm doing is I'm picking it out over here. Sorry, I create a node here. Let's do that again. I create a node. And then over here we have a library of effects. So if I want an effect, I can just pull it onto this node. So we're going to go down here and find tilt shift. I'm actually just going to search for it and pull it onto here and let go. Now, what this does is that it has a midpoint where everything is following. Let's go back. And the way this works, if we click over here, you can see that the black in the middle is not being touched. So the two bottom sliders control the bottom and the top. So if we do like this right now, let's say we put these to 0. Right now there's nothing changed with the image, but let's pull this one and then see if you can notice what happens. And by the way, a very good tip for DaVinci is instead of pulling the slider, you can pull the number, which is far more accurate. So in this case, what I want to do right now is I actually want to go through my clip and see how low is too low, first of all. So this point here, that's my guidance here. Let's go around here. So what's the highest point? That's this guy. So I don't want to go lower than this because I want to see his face. So I'm just going to pull back until I feel that he's in focus. Let's go full screen. A little bit less. Like that. That would probably be nice. Then we're going to do the same for the bottom. Simply going to pull it up. And at the bottom here, I actually want quite a bit of blur. So what it looks like now is that the black part is completely in focus, and the more white it gets, the more out of focus it is. But this gives a whole new dimension to the scene. So now this is going to play back slow because we have a lot of color grading stuff going on here. That's why it's being played back like this. But as you can see, this really makes a difference. So if we want to look at the difference between what we've done so far, we are going to take everything here and now bypass everything. So now this is completely like the clip was straight from the GoPro, and this is with our color grading. That's quite a big difference. We could do more though. So we're going to add another serial, and then let's have a look at what we can do. That's fun down here. We'd also do a dehaze, for instance. A dehaze is, well, have a look at what happens when I pull it on. So dehaze does a lot of stuff, and sometimes it can do wonders for your material, but as you can see, it has its own tonality. It really does color everything. So this slider up here determines the strength of it, and you can actually go nuts with this, or you can just have a little bit of effect. You could also have it like this and then go on the global blend, which is a parameter for all effects, and then you can blend it into the picture. So this is without anything, and now we're just going to add a little bit of dehazing to it. And then for the final touch, let's actually add some denoising. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the very first node of everything. I'm going to add a serial before it, and that's going to be our denoise. So denoise is also a paid function. I just want to show you what it does. Let's find a place with a lot of noise. If you focus on this area here, you can see that there's quite a lot of noise in this. It could be sharper. So we've picked the denoise, and we're going to go over here to this motion effects tab. So the way this works is pretty advanced, so I'm just going to show you how it works instead of explaining everything about it. Basically, I'm going to be picking a denoise level, and I'm going to be adding. So you can see the more I add from this, let's get it full screen. This is with full denoise. Now watch closely for this part when I disable the denoise. You see how much texture there is, and now there's none. This also has a bad effect. If you notice this area down here, you can see that it's kind of not existing anymore. So the whole image gets very washed out, which can be nice for some things, but this is way too much denoise. So what you actually want to do is you want to pick a spot where you know there's noise, here for instance, then apply 100%, and then you go over here to the denoise. Let me think for a second. I did something wrong. No, sorry. Yeah, you apply 100% here, and while you're still on your denoise tab, you go up here to this magic wand that's called highlight. You click it, and then you click AB. Now this is all the stuff that's being denoised. So the general rule of thumb here is, if you can see the object, then the object is being affected, and we don't want the denoise to alter our object. So as you can see, you can clearly see the tank. So now I'm going to grab the denoise parameter here, and I'm going to scroll backwards. And depending on how fast your computer is, when you scroll and let go, it's going to take a while for it to actually do something. So let's see. I think this is sort of acceptable. So now we know that, let's go back. Now we know that we're only denoising what actually matters. So this is the image with denoise right now, and this is without. So you can see that it's removing a lot, but it's still keeping a lot of detail. So that's definitely one way of doing it. So once we're done with all of this, and this is also because a lot of people ask about my export settings. Let's pull this somewhere. Yeah, that's fine. Whatever. So what I actually do in here is I always pick QuickTime H.264, and then I select NVIDIA because I have the studio version, so I can select my graphics card. The resolution is set from the timeline, so it's the frame rate, and everything else I leave. The only thing I make sure of is that I pick QuickTime. That's all I do. And then I click Add to Render Queue. By doing that, it comes over here, and then I render it. Now, in the post I'm going to be putting up, I will also be putting up this clip as a... I'm just going to be putting up a clip with the actual everything applied and the entire raw file, so you can have a look at it. So please let me know in some comments if you would like to see more of this, and if I should spend some time actually doing a full from the ground up tutorial about davinci, about drones, about how you can get some really good stuff from your material. That's all. Have a nice day, guys.